Hello and welcome to another episode of Doug Formative. Today I want to show you how you can recreate this ABC logo. The other day I was watching a program online and it was produced by ABC, and when I saw this little intro that they had before the program started, I was thinking to myself, that looks pretty easy to recreate, and I thought it would be a cool challenge to try to get as close to this ABC logo as I could. So whether you're a beginner or if you are a seasoned Inkscape user, but you wanted another challenge, feel free to follow along. I think it's, it'll be helpful and maybe you'll learn something, while working on this thing. So let's go ahead and move this off to the side. And the first thing I want to recreate are the letters, which are very simple to do. If you notice, they're all just circles with the same sized hole cut out of each of them. So we're going to grab our circles tool, hold Control, click, and just drag out a circle, a perfect circle shape. Now we're going to grab our selector tool by hitting S on the keyboard. And what we want to do is make this a nice even number so it's easier to work with. So let's make sure that this little lock button is selected, and let's just round down to the nearest 100. So change the width to 300 and hit enter. And now we want to create the hole in the circle. So let's duplicate this by holding Control and hitting D on the keyboard. And then we're going to make the width on this 150. Now what we want to do is make sure that this smaller circle is centered on the larger one. So with the small one selected, we're going to hold Shift, click on the larger one. And over here in our Align and Distribute menu, we want to center on the vertical and horizontal axis. Now we want to click off of everything. Now we want to select the small circle, hold Shift, then select the larger circle, and then hold Control, Shift, and minus on the keyboard, and that will get rid of that middle circle. Now why did I deselect everything before I did that? It's because whatever function you do when it comes to union or difference or aligning objects, it's always going to base it on whatever you have chosen over here, and it's usually defaulted to last selected. So if I select the smaller circle and then I select the larger one last, it's going to take away that shape from the larger circle because that was the last selected object. They have other options down here: first selected, biggest, smallest, page, and it's just whatever your personal preference is, but if you get used to last selected, it's just easier to remember it that way. Now what we want to do is, because the other two letters are based on this same shape, we want to duplicate this twice. So select that object, hold Control, and hit D twice. Now we can hold Control, make sure snapping is turned off though. Hold Control, click and drag this one over, and then click again and drag this third one over. And then just take a look at the spacing over here. They're pretty close together. And that looks about right. But in order to make sure that the spacing is even between all three shapes, we're going to click and drag over all three. And then under the Align and Distribute menu, we want to click the button that says Make Horizontal Gaps Between Objects Equal. And that just makes sure that the spacing is going to be even throughout. Alright, now the next step, we're going to create these little additional shapes that make each of these letters unique. But before I do that, what I want to do is I want to create a guideline. So anytime you hover over this little measurement area up top or over here on the side, you can click and drag down a guideline. Now we want to turn snapping back on, and we want to make sure that we have snap smooth nodes and quadrant points of ellipses selected. And what that's going to allow us to do is snap to this very, very bottom point of the circle. And now we want to create a rectangle shape that is going to be the bottom part of the A right here. So what we want to do is just click and drag out a rectangle shape. It doesn't matter what size. Now we want to grab our selector tool by hitting S on the keyboard. And if you remember, each of these circles was 300 pixels wide. And then this gap right here was 150 pixels wide, meaning each of these other sections of the circle are going to be 75 pixels wide. So now with this selected, we're going to change the width, and we can unselect the lock here. We're going to change the width to 75. So just hit 75 and enter. And we could probably make it a little bit taller by dragging that middle arrow up. Now we're going to bring this up, and it's going to snap onto that smooth node right there, which is exactly what we want. And now we can click this middle arrow on the bottom and drag it up until it snaps onto that guide. And now with this shape that we just created selected, we can hold shift, click on the big circle here, hold control, shift, and then hit plus on the keyboard. And that's going to unionize those shapes. And now it's one solid shape. And now we want to do a similar thing to create the letter B, only that shape is going to be a little bit taller. And we don't really have much of a guideline to go along for this B shape, so we just want to make it as close to the height that we would want for that letter. So let's click and drag another rectangle shape, grab our selector tool, and we want to make sure that it is also 75 pixels wide. And now we're going to click and drag this down and until it snaps on that smooth node there. And then we just want to grab this upper middle arrow here and just drag it up until we're happy with the height of it. You know, it's not crazy tall or anything. You know, I think that looks about right there. I'm happy with that. So with this object selected, we're going to hold shift, click on the circle, hold control, shift, and plus to create that union. And now the last thing we need to do for the letters is just cut out this area of the third circle to create the letter C. So we're going to grab our rectangular tool again, and we're going to click and we're going to drag a longer shape, just making sure that it's wider than the width of the circle, the outer ring of the circle. And it's not exactly the same thickness as this, so I'm going to round down a little bit. So let's grab our selector tool, and instead of changing the width, we're going to change the height. You know, the width of the letters are 75, so I want to go a little bit smaller than that. I'm thinking maybe 65. Might be still a little bit too big. Let me do 60. I think that will work. And now what I want to do is, with this selected, we're going to hold shift, click on this third circle shape, and we want to align it on the horizontal axis. And now I'm going to hold control, and we're going to click and drag this so it overlaps this letter here. And let's take a look. You know, and that looks about right. It doesn't have to be 100% perfect. This is strictly for practice anyway, but I think that'll look fine. So with this selected, we're going to hold shift, click on the big ring, hold control, shift, and then hit minus on the keyboard, and that's going to cut out that area to create the letter C. And actually, I think that looks pretty good. So what we want to do now, let's go ahead and drag these letters up and out of the way. Now I want to create another rectangle shape that's going to represent the area that's behind the logo, and we're going to go by the standard width and height of like a widescreen television. So with our selector tool chosen, we're going to change the width to 1920 by 1080. You know, and that just gives us, you know, a basic widescreen format. And I don't need this guideline anymore, so if you click on the guideline and hit delete, it will get rid of it. And now we can go ahead and zoom in, and we want to create the circle shape for the outside of the ABC logo. So how we're going to do that is by grabbing our circle tool, holding control, and clicking and dragging a perfect circle shape out. Hold on, let me choose a different color. Hold Control, click and drag at a 45-degree angle to get your perfect circle. And we don't want it to be too big because it's only going to take up a small area in the center of this rectangle shape. And now what we want to do is grab our selector tool and center it on this rectangle. So hold Shift, click on the rectangle, center it on the vertical and horizontal axis, and then I think it needs to be a little bit smaller than that. So let's click off to the side to deselect everything and just click on the circle, hold Control, Shift, and then click on any of these arrows to shrink it down to about that size. And if you hold Control and Shift, what it does is it keeps the object on its same central point and just shrinks it around the very center of the object. If you just hold Control and click and drag from an arrow, it's gonna take the opposite side, the opposite edge of that object and keep it on that point. So for instance, if I held Control and clicked down from this top arrow here, it's going to keep it on that bottom edge, as you can see. But I want to undo that by holding Control and hitting the letter Z. Now what I want to do is, let's go ahead and align our letters onto this. In order to align these letters onto this circle here, first I want to hold Control and I want to shrink it down a little bit. And then I'm going to click and drag it over here and turn them white. And the reason you can't see them is because they're not at the top. And we need to move them to the top by clicking Raise Selection to Top. And we can go ahead and bring the opacity all the way up now. Now they're still a little bit too big. If you notice on the original logo, the letters are just a little bit smaller than the circle. So let's try to get that as close as possible. Let's hold Control, click and drag that in a little bit, and let's turn snapping off just so that doesn't cause any issues. And then we're gonna try to get this as close to the middle as possible. And that looks about right as far as the size. And now what we want to do is we want to make sure that it's centered. If you notice on the original logo, the middle part of the letter B, or the circle shape, is like dead center on the big circle here. You know, it's not centered based on the entire size of the B. So in order to do that, we can't use B as the reference. We have to use one of the smaller letters. So let's click off to the side. Now what we want to do is just select the letter A, hold Shift, select this circle, and let's align that on the horizontal axis. And now we're going to click on the letter B, hold Shift, click on the letter C, then hold Shift, click on the letter A last, and then we want to align them on the bottom edges. And if you notice, the letter B and C moved up just slightly, and now all three letters are centered on the horizontal axis of this circle shape. And now what we want to do is, let's go ahead and group these together by holding Control and hitting G on the keyboard. And now we can hold Shift, click on the circle, and we can align them on the vertical axis. So now that is centered exactly where we need it to be. Now what we can do is we can click on the circle. We can go ahead and bring the opacity all the way back up. And let's go ahead and duplicate the circle by holding Control and hitting D on the keyboard. And what we want to do now is we're going to create this gradient right here with this reddish orange shape. So with that new circle selected, we're going to go to our Fill and Stroke menu, make sure Fill tab is chosen, and we're going to choose Linear Gradient. Grab your gradient tool, and we're going to choose this like reddish orange color. That should work. And now we're going to grab this square, which is that orange color, and we're going to drag that down, and then grab the circle and then move it in at an angle. Now if you notice on the original logo, it's kind of at an angle like that, so that's what we want to try to recreate. So bring it to an angle and then just drag it down a little bit more. Alright, now what we want to do is, there's another gradient, this yellow gradient right here. So let's do that next by grabbing our selector tool. And now we can duplicate this circle again by holding Control and hitting D. But what we want to do is we're going to choose this one, the Radial Gradient. We'll grab our gradient tool again, click on the square, and we're going to choose this yellow color, this like golden yellow color. And now we can click this square and we're going to drag this down to this bottom corner down here. And then I want to drag this in. And if you notice, you can rotate that. And if you notice, you can see how it's you can see the outline of the radius, and we don't want that. We want it to kind of blend more. So what I want to do is I want to create an additional gradient point by double clicking on the line here, and we're going to select that same orange color that we had before. And now what we can do is we can click and drag this part out, same with that, and then we can drag this in, and then we can bring this down and make whatever adjustments you need to, just to get that radius how you need it to be. And it's going to take a little bit of playing around, you know, and you might even need to click on this circle underneath this. So if you grab your selector tool by hitting S on the keyboard, you can hold Alt, and that's going to click the gradient or the object that's underneath that one. So with that one selected, we can grab our gradient tool again, and we can drag this up to make that orange a little bit brighter. And what that's going to do is make this new gradient we just created blend a little bit better. And what I'm thinking might be the problem is I think we need to get rid of that. So it's just the yellow blending into nothing, basically. And I think that's looking a lot better. You know, it's blending into the other orange color a lot better. And I think we're right about where we need to be with that. Okay, so the next step, I want to recreate this other circle shape with the white linear gradient. And how we're going to do that, let's hit S on the keyboard to grab our selector tool again. Now I'm going to hold Alt, click on the circle, and then click again until you see this fill color down here turn black. And that's because that is the original circle that we created. And what I want to do with that is I want to hold Control, click and drag that out. Just a hair. And now you can see that it gives us like a black outline down here. So if you notice on the original logo, there's a black outline around the outside edge of the circle. And I can even go maybe a little bit thicker, not too much though. And then this other orange gradient, it kind of comes in a little bit. Like it doesn't follow that same shape. It comes in just a hair. Alright, now I want this original black circle. So if you click on this circle, hold Alt, click again until you see the black shape. I want to duplicate that by holding Control and hitting D, and then I want one more duplicate. So I'm going to hit D one more time while still hitting Control. Now so I can see what I'm doing, I'm going to bring the opacity down on this and drag it up. I need to do the same on this one. And now if you look at where this gradient starts, it's still kind of coming downward in the middle of the A shape here. And that's what I want to try to do. So I'm going to click and I'm going to drag this over to right about there. And now I'm going to hold Shift, click on this other circle, which is the duplicate that we created, and I just need the intersection between these two circles. So I'm going to go up to Path, Intersection. And now with this selected, this new shape, I want to create a linear gradient. Go to our gradient tool, click on the square, and then change that to white. And now we just need to adjust the gradient to where we want it to be. And first, if that ever happens to you, sometimes it just takes you to click off of an object and then click on it again, and you'll find out that your opacity is turned down. So let's grab our gradient tool again and just make whatever adjustments you need to make. And now we want to lower this. So grab our selector tool and just lower it until it's underneath the letters but above this other circle here. So let's look at what is going on here. Alright, so if you notice, it looks like our letters have a little bit of a black outline around them, and that way you can differentiate the letters from this white gradient behind it. So let's add a black background to our letters. Let's hold Alt and click until it's the letters selected. And let's ungroup them by holding Control Shift G. And now we want to turn that into a union by holding Control Shift and then hitting plus on the keyboard. And now, with that selected, we'll hold Shift and click on black down here to get a black outline. And obviously that's way too thick. So we want to go down here to our fill and stroke menu, click on stroke style. Let's change this to pixels and change the width to about 1. And I think that's closer to what we're gonna want, because it's a very thin outline on the letters over here. And just let's click and drag this over so it's easier to see what we're doing here. Alright, so we're going to click on that, grab our gradient tool again. That's not it. So hold Alt, click until we get the one that we want. And we're going to drag this back a little bit more. And the further out you have these 2 points, the more of a blend you're going to get in your gradient. So now we're getting closer to that gradient that we want. You know, that's starting to look a lot more like this. Okay. Now we're getting somewhere. Now, if you notice, there's kind of this glow behind this main ABC circle here. It's like an orangish glow. So let's go ahead and create that by, let's create a pretty big ellipse shape or big circle shape like that. You know, if we need to make it bigger, we can. Now we're going to turn that into a radial gradient. So let's click there, grab our gradient tool, and then click on that square here, and we're going to make that this orange color. So it's about that same orange that we have here, but maybe a little bit darker. And what I want to do is I want to drag these guys out just a little bit. And to see what we're doing now, I'm going to turn this background. So hit S on your keyboard, turn this background rectangle, turn the opacity all the way up. And then make sure that that's all the way at the bottom. Click on this new circle we just created, grab the gradient tool again, and we're just going to drag this in so you don't see an outline. You just want to see it fading into black. And if you notice, it doesn't really show on this top left part of the circle. It's kind of in the lower right hand side. So what we're going to do is we're going to click here and we're going to drag it down a little bit more. And then I want to make it a little bit darker and a little bit redder, I think, too. Actually, no. Alright, so there we go. And I don't want it fading into, I want it fading into black. But now what I want to do, let's choose the orange color again. That's better. But now what we want to do is grab our selector tool. Let's click lowered selection to bottom and then up one step. And now that puts it directly behind this logo. And then you can move it however you want to. I kind of like it showing a little bit up here. And we're getting pretty close to finishing. There's a couple of other small details. If you notice over here, it has this little like yellow sliver shape. And then it has this little shadow that's coming down from the letter B. You don't really notice it on the other letters, so we really only need to duplicate that right there. So to create the sliver shape, what we want to do is let's click on the circle, hold Alt, and then click on it until we get the black color, because that's pretty much the circle shape that we want. We're going to hold Control and hit D, and let's change it to red so we can see what we're doing, and lower the opacity. Hold Control and hit D again. Now we want to click and just drag it out enough to where you see this sliver shape. And this upper circle, I think we're going to need to make it a little bit bigger. Because if you notice, the sliver doesn't go up very high. And now, with this upper circle selected, we're going to hold Shift, Alt, and then click again. And that's going to select the lower circle. And we want to go to Path, Difference. And now you can see we have this little sliver shape. And we can adjust the size however we need to. So we can put the shape down here, and then we can drag it in. It doesn't have to remain a perfect arch, I guess, compared to the original circle, because it's not. And you can even grab this corner up here, and that gives you a little bit more play when it comes to changing the shape of it. You know, just get it to the point where you're happy. And you can leave the opacity down, and then we can just choose a yellow color, because I don't think it's a full opacity. And then we can even add a blur effect. And now we want to make sure that we lower it so it's underneath the letters. So what we want to do, let's just click on hold Alt and click until you have the letters selected, and then just bring the letters all the way up to the top by clicking this button here, raise selection to top. Now everything that we've just created is underneath the letters. And now we can go ahead and create that shadow off of the letter B here by grabbing our Bezier pen. So hit B on the keyboard, make sure snapping is turned on. Now we're just going to lock onto this corner here, and let's hold Control and come down. I think it's about maybe a 60-degree angle. Let's double check. No, it's more like a 45-degree angle. So if you hold Control and you move this around, you see it locks onto certain points. If you look down here at the bottom, it tells you what angle you're at. So since I'm going straight down, it's showing 90 degrees, but now it's showing 45. And we just want to click and drag this out until it's underneath the letter here. So we're just going to click to create a point, and we're just going to finish this shape off by doing that. Let's get rid of this outline by holding Shift and clicking on the letter X. We're going to turn that black, and then we're going to turn it into a linear gradient by clicking there. Let's grab our gradient tool, and then just make sure that the gradient is the angle that we want it to be. If you notice on the original, it kind of fades out. Like you can see the shadow closer to here, and then it kind of blends in with the background. And then we're going to grab our selector tool by hitting S on the keyboard, and we want to lower that selection by 1 so it goes behind the letter. And that is pretty much it, guys. Let me know what you think in the comments below. If you can think of another logo that you want to see me recreate, that would be another fun project as well. But that is it. See you guys in my next video. Take care. If you're enjoying my videos, don't forget to subscribe right here. Also, you can follow me on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook so you can share it with your friends. Thanks again, and I'll see you next time.